Unity 2020. Here's the deal. It is going great at one level. We are discovering the most amazing set of patriots. These are people who are frightened about where we're headed, people who love their country and are ready to sacrifice for it, and they are showing up to offer all kinds of help, skills that we definitely need. So things are rapidly in motion. As I have mentioned before, there is a curious lack. The people who tell us that they are very much on board with the plan do not always do anything that allows us to count them so that we can say how many people are actually rooting for us. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why I think that might be.
So before you talk about why you think there's a failure somewhere, why don't you say both here, why don't you bracket this conversation by saying what should be happening? What would you like people to be doing?
Well, here's the long and short of it. The long and short of it is there is exactly one thing that we do not have, and this plan could actually work. Believe it or not, it is not too late. Everything that needs to happen can happen. What we need is a visible groundswell of American citizens eligible to vote.
Right, but where do they sign up?
They go to,
where's the place that you want them to be signing up?
We want them to go to the website articlesofunity.org. You will find there are links to offer your volunteer support, to sign up for our email list, and let us know where you are and what you're thinking. So please do that. You should also follow our Twitter account if you are on Twitter, Articles of Unity, @ArticlesOfUnity. Those are the places to go. There will be more opportunities showing up this week. And so anyway, those are the places to sign up for you to find out about what is emerging. And yes, we are looking for your help, but really, you want to do something for us? Find 2 people with ears to hear and tell them. That's it. 2 people. And then you ask them, can you find 2 people? That'll work, right?
But you won't know that will have happened unless they also sign up.
Unless they show up at those addresses.
Yeah.
All right. So now I want to talk to you. I'm noticing I need to center myself a little bit more in the shot. Okay. Here's the model that I came up with as I was driving back from dropping Zach at his bicycle maintenance course that he is taking. What I realized was that we are hearing pushback from a couple of quadrants. And one of those quadrants are people who say things to us like, this sounds like a great plan. How about waiting till 2024 when we've already allowed Joe Biden to clear Donald Trump from the White House, et cetera, et cetera. Could you please just shelve this plan? Seems really cool, but
I got to say that sounds like a great idea because it will give all of the enemies of the plan much more time to organize and get their shit together.
I hadn't even thought of that. That's a great point. Yeah. Here's the thing. If you are somebody who has been alarmed about the corruption of our system and the role that the duopoly plays in that corruption, if you've been aware of that for decades, then you know that every single election cycle we go through this, right? You say, you know what? This is not going to solve itself. The duopoly has a lock on power, and that lock on power is being used to serve interests that are not the interests of the American people. What are we going to do about it? If
why don't you just go through the normal channels?
Go through the normal channels. But if you say, well, we've done that and it doesn't work, and you say, maybe we have to do something else, what happens next is people say, if you do something else, you will elect the greater evil, and this will be your fault, right? And nobody wants it to be your fault, right? We've seen that happen to people like Ralph Nader.
Unity 2020 is being set up to explain the re-election of Trump.
Right.
When in fact, we can squarely point at the DNC.
Well, first of all, the DNC is responsible for this in more ways than one. The RNC as well. The duopoly has played tag team with their little corruption racket. And so in any case, you will hear each election cycle, you will hear you're going to elect the greater evil, and this is going to be your fault. And then if you persist, you will be told, well, you can't do it this time because of the Supreme Court, right? This is just every single election cycle.
Yeah. It's amazing. The Supreme Court always seems to be on the verge of retirement and collapse.
It's funny. It's almost as if it's staffed by mortals who have a lifespan and ultimately end up retiring and need to be replaced. So it's never the time for something new.
Not to suggest that the makeup of the Supreme Court isn't critical, but it's always sort of, I don't know, what was that, the second or the third rejoinder to it has to be now.
Well, let's put it this way. The fact that it is critical this time is not an argument against something different because it only gets more critical over time. So if you think it's critical now and that's a reason not to do it, you've actually got it backwards. Now is the time we have to do it because next time it's going to be even more critical.
Well, maybe people are suggesting going back in time.
If they have a mechanism, I'm all ears. But in any case, here's the thing. I've heard so many times that you can't do it because you'll elect a greater evil. The whole structure of this plan is built to address that concern, right? We don't have that problem because we have structurally built a mechanism that will not spoil the election. So, in spite of that fact, we are getting this pushback from certain people who say, lovely plan, all ears, do it in 2024 and we'll get on board, but not now because of the problem. So I want to tell you about my model that I came up with as I was driving back. The model is this. For many people, Donald Trump is the equivalent of a rock in your shoe, right? And if you've ever had a rock in your shoe, and we've all had rocks in our shoe, right? A rock in your shoe is top priority. It's very hard to ignore, right? Every step, it reminds you that this has to be dealt with. And there are a lot of people who are experiencing Trump as the rock in their shoe that needs to be dealt with. But we've got a rock in our shoe at the same time that we've got basically the equivalent of a famine, right? We have a duopoly that has concentrated its power and built a system that you can never escape, and it has essentially denied people access to the policy mechanisms that are supposed to serve their needs. And this has gone on for decades. And because of that, people are not only frozen out of the well-being that they produce through their labor, but they are also aware of it and they're sick of it. They know that the system is rigged. They may not know exactly in what way it is rigged, but they're angry. And here's the important point. Whether or not the rock in the shoe is the one thing you can think of, or it's one on a set of high priorities that all have to be addressed, has to do, in some sense, with how threatened by the famine you are. If you're especially well positioned in society, then from your perspective, it may well make sense. We have to deal with the rock in our shoe, because even in a famine, you wouldn't want to leave a rock in your shoe, because whatever you're going to do to deal with the famine, getting the rock out of your shoe first makes sense. So if you're not directly threatened by the famine, then you will think rock in your shoe is the only thing we got. And you'll say stuff like, well, why don't you wait till 2024, right? Let's deal with the rock in our shoe, and then 2024, we can deal with the famine. But for anybody who's either starving or threatened with starvation, that doesn't make any sense, because the rock in the shoe is a high priority and the famine is a high priority. And we're going to have to do something to deal with both of them. Maybe we got to get the rock out, but we've also got to deal with the famine. And here's an election in which you could do both.
Could I read to you a couple of sentences from an excellent document that I found from almost 10 years ago?
Please do.
Recent decades, this is from 2011. Recent decades have witnessed a de facto coup against the democratic structures of the world and the wholesale capture and sabotage of the entire public regulatory apparatus. The co-opted structures have been redirected and now serve to liquidate the world's resources and concentrate wealth and power in the hands of a tiny, unelected elite. Only the costs remain public. And it goes on. This is from the Declaration of Interdependence, which you wrote during Occupy, and which proceeds to make a number of highly specific and actionable bullet points about what to do. Just to the argument that not now, please wait until next time when there's a greater chance of success, when there will presumably be no two evils to choose between. This was the first time that I know that you had formalized in writing some of exactly the concerns that you have laid out in the first, 5 minutes of this live stream today. This is from 2011.
That's amazing. Thank you. I have thought frequently during this Unity 2020 phase, I've thought about that document, and I just literally have not had the time to go find it. But yeah, I wrote the Declaration of Interdependence, and it lays out exactly the problem. And what that tells you is that the fact that bit that you read there is equally applicable today. Right. That tells you some of us have been aware of this for quite some time, and we've tried to call people's attention to it. And what people have been is too calm to address it. Yeah, and
let me say that we as we have been making clear throughout, had been anyway, still are lifelong Democrats, liberals, progressives. Much to the irritation of some in our audience, but. This was written in 2011. This was written during Obama's first term. We were so hopeful about Obama in the beginning, and that does not mean that we did not critique during his first and certainly his second term what it was that was actually being accomplished after that great rhetorical movement that actually got him elected. And that's what it was. It was rhetoric.
It was a rhetoric. It was a rhetorical movement. You're absolutely right about that. And I still like a lot of the rhetoric, but the fact is
rhetoric's great.
it didn't translate
Yeah.
into policy that served people. And what that tells you is that the duopoly, I mean, let's face facts, folk. They don't want to solve the problem, not because they wouldn't ideally like to do it also, but it is counterproductive from the point of view of the thing that they actually do, which is deliver well-being to a small number of very powerful entities that have bought access. Right? It's an influence peddling racket. So we shouldn't expect them. We should expect them to deliver us rhetoric and symbolism and false solutions until we finally get wise to it. And my point would be, well, maybe it's time we finally got wise to it. I mean, collectively, enough that we can actually evict them from the positions from which they capture all of the well-being that should be widely available and deliver it to their own. It's really, it's quite a thing. But if you are hearing the same thing we are hearing, if you are hearing people say, well, that's a cool plan, how about we try that in 2024? Think about whether or not the people who are telling you that are really telling you that from their perspective, the famine isn't such a big deal because on the whole, the duopoly has probably inadvertently, in most of their cases, served their interest just by virtue of where in society they are. And for people who are closer to the bottom of the ladder or who have fallen off the bottom of the ladder, this has been critical for decades, right? The danger to working people is so extreme that now we see quite predictable movements in the street of people, frankly, shouting incoherently to tear the thing down because all they can see is the harm that it does because that harm is concentrated where they are. So that is all very important. Now, I would point to the last thing here, which is really the place that's harder, that I find hardest to make the point. It has long been true that the Democratic Party in particular has delivered symbolism in lieu of actual well-being, right? That's been their go-to strategy.
Which party did you say is particularly prone to that?
Well, it's not that one party is particularly prone to it. It's that the Democratic Party has traditionally served the interests of working people.
Okay.
And so having shifted away from that, now it has to deliver symbolism in lieu of actual policy. You know,
symbols are cheaper.
They are cheaper. But in this case, the symbols have begun to run out. People aren't buying it anymore, right? We went through 8 years of Obama and things did not get better. So we know that the rhetoric doesn't add up to policy that actually serves people. We know that we still have, a system of medical care, for example, that people can't access and that is dependent on their relationship with their employer, and that the economic system is fragile in the way it's constructed, and so you can lose your health care, at the drop of a hat. So what has changed is the Democratic Party seems to be toying with a mechanism to deliver many people who are stressed out by what I'm calling the famine, to deliver them something. But the something that they're going to deliver is well-being that currently is held by other people who are in a similar strata. In other words, the intersectional thing is about pointing people who are angry about having been frozen out, redirecting them away from the places where well-being is actually concentrated and pointing them at another group of citizens. And this is the most deeply unpatriotic move you can imagine, pointing Americans at each other rather than dealing with the fact that opportunity has concentrated at the top is just appalling.
To use the pie analogy, the zero-sum, non-zero-sum language that we have used, it is possible that some growth in some sectors can continue. But even if we assume that we are in zero-sum space at a national level with regard to well-being, and I'm not saying that that's true, but even if we assume that, what you are saying, if I hear you correctly, is there is some pie for, and this is going to be hard to operationalize, but, for well-being, which is, to some degree, the good proxy is resources there for all of Americans. And what you were pointing out is that the elite, the 1%, the people with power, have observed that a number of people are seeing this, since Occupy, since before then, right? And saying, well, if we can pit some of the kind of haves against the recognizing have-nots against each other, we can redefine what the pie actually is to be that very tiny sliver of the actual pie while we keep all the rest of it. So it's like a pie within a pie. And the people with most of it are successfully redefining what the actual pie is and causing the rest of us to fight amongst ourselves.
Yeah. So I was toying with the idea that Biden was the let them eat cake candidate, that's really the nature of Joe Biden at the moment.
Mhm.
And you fixed that analogy beautifully. Remember what you said?
Not at the moment.
You said, no, he's the let them eat their cake candidate.
Oh, yeah.
Because in let them eat cake, there's no cake. That's the point. The rent-seeking elites in the monarchy don't understand that there's no cake.
Right.
And so that's an absurd
Only
solution.
they have cake.
Only they have cake.
Right.
So they think cake is everywhere.
Right.
In this case, there is cake.
Well, there's such an abundance of cheap goods that were exactly the things that were limiting until like a second ago, historically speaking, that, let them eat their cake. Cake's available.
Right. And so in this case, instead of taking and again, we have to draw a distinction between the productivity of elites, which actually serves everybody, and the rent seeking of people who become powerful. Some of them have gotten powerful through being highly productive and contributing things that matter. But once they are productive, it's very hard to resist. They don't even necessarily know that they are engaged in rent seeking. There are just opportunities that pay. And they do that which pays, and many of those opportunities are rent-seeking by definition. So the DNC has decided to point us at each other, and the basic point is, well, there's not enough cake. But if this group goes after the cake of that group, then the rent-seeking elites can continue on for another 4, 8, who knows how many election cycles, for 8 years.
Yeah. The baked goods analogy gets twisted, but it's like a cupcake within a pie.
Well, there are twisted baked goods, not that many, but some very, like a
delicious ones. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, that's the developing model.
Yeah.
And here's the question. Presumably, if you're watching or listening to this podcast, you're wise to this stuff. You're aware of game theory. You're aware of what rent seeking is and why it's a hazard. You're aware of the evolutionary forces that will take a corrupt system and make it more corrupt because the loopholes will tend to self-enlarge. So if you can see it, then isn't this the moment? Wouldn't you like in 4 months for us to have turned the corner for something unexpected, new, and potentially very desirable to have happened? Wouldn't you like adults at the helm? I mean, don't you have a right to demand that as an American, to have adults at the helm? Don't we all? So how about it?